Well, hello. Welcome to Bookish, everybody, your favorite virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life, brought to you by the Southern California News Group and the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn, the senior editor of premium content here at SCNG and a book nerd and author myself. I want to say thanks to our Reader Rewards subscribers as always, and to all of you who've made our ongoing programs so popular. By the way, if you are a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift card from our partner and one of our favorite independent bookstores in the Los Angeles County, Once Upon a Time. And wait, if you're not a subscriber yet, well, why not? Go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper and please join us. That way you're going to know about all the things that are going on, like the new book our sports staff put together on the behind the scenes of the Rams. Yay, Super Bowl victory. Go to scng.com/Rams book to check it out. Okay, so before we get started, the usual things I have to tell you. Audience members are muted to allow for the free flow of conversation among the guests. But if you have questions, and of course we hope you do, please join us in the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. And if you just want to add a comment or chat with other people, use that chat feature also found on your screen. We're going to be monitoring the questions and the comments, and we'll respond as much as possible. This session is videotaped as usual, and a link is going to be sent to you so you can share it or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events, where you're going to be able to find all of our past virtual shows and see what's coming up. Anyway, now it's my pleasure to introduce our bookish host, the writer, performer, and radio commentator. You probably know her work from NPR's Morning Edition and This American Life. She's a contributing editor at The Atlantic and host of the syndicated daily radio Minute, the lowdown on science. She's the author of many books and plays and you name it, but her most recent book is The Mad Woman and the Roomba. Beaming to us from her bohemian splendor in Pasadena, please welcome my friend, Sandra Singlo. Sandra!
Hello!
Hello! I hear you're
My-
busy. Oh, by the way, happy belated birthday.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, you've got something going on. Tell us.
I do. So, of course, Bookish, we started the pandemic and we love our Zoom and we will always be on Zoom so we don't have to drive. But in the new year, I've invented a new live performance series called Not a Prairie Home Companion, like of Garrison Keillor, but a Dina Home Companion. You recall in our noteworthy book thing that the city of Pasadena was voted the best book for book lovers. And right here in Pasadena, Altadena, at the Coffee Gallery backstage, we're doing a monthly show that's a takeoff of an old-timey fashioned radio show. You see the new COVID Wranglers in that photo and the Omicron airs. And if you see on the right a familiar face, yes, that's John Michael Higgins, best in show, kimono guy, the Pekingese, Pitch Perfect, is just licorice pizza. He happens to have an expertise in writing four-part harmonies. He's written our Jingle K DNA, The Sound of the Foothills. It's a fictional radio station. So if you're in the Pasadena, Altadena area or want an excuse, our show is a week from this Sunday, February 27th, and we're calling it Mardi Gras Dina for Mardi Gras in the Dinas. So come on out.
Awesome. We'll put that in the chat for those of you who are.
Yes, put the link in the chat.
Yes. Anyway, so.
But February also brings this show, and I think for the February theme, I was thinking of the holidays, of the many holidays we have in February. The one that I think is most thematic for today is Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day? You mean February 2nd? When the groundhog comes out of his burrow and predicts the next 6 weeks of weather? Like Puxatawny Phil of Gobbler's Knob, Pennsylvania, made famous by the 1993 romantic comedy Groundhog Day?
Oh, very good. And you didn't have to check your notes, Samantha. That was so smooth. Yes. And so for today, amazingly, we have the writer of Groundhog Day, Danny Rubin, here to talk to us about that. And also, fun fact, if you Google Groundhog Day, the top search is, what does Groundhog Day mean in a relationship?
Don't even.
I think excitingly, we have Heather Havrilesky today to talk about her hilarious memoir, which is called Foreverland on the Divine Tedium of Marriage almost too on the nose for many of us, and it's a hilarious book. But then first up, we have Esquire journalist Chris Jones, and see how I'm going to connect the theme here, whose intriguing new book describes how even in this age of metadata, our senses can trump analytics, and it is thus, wait for the central metaphor, that an infallible weatherman can be a groundhog. See how we did that, the whole
semantic. It was magic. It was magic. Listen, there's so much magic. I'm just going to get out of here and let you get to it. So ciao.
Ciao. And see y'all in the chat as we go. Okay, so first up we have Chris Jones, and here's the 30-second download. Chris Jones is a former writer at large for Esquire magazine and is the winner of not one but 2 National Magazine Awards. He's the author of Out of Orbit, the incredible true story of 3 astronauts who were hundreds of miles above Earth when they lost their ride home, if you can imagine that, and Falling Hard, a rookie's year in boxing. His work has also appeared in the Best American Magazine Writing and the Best American Sports Writing anthologies. His new book, which you see on screen here, just out, it's fascinating, is The Eye Test, a case for human creativity in the age of analytics. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
Good, and you're all the way up in Canada, correct?
Where we have our own Groundhog Day, by the way.
You do. Where is that, in any particular town, or is it
Wyerton? And it's actually a very dark story. Wyerton Willie. Yeah, it's Wyerton Willie is our groundhog, and he is an albino. And this year he passed away, and they've struggled to find a replacement, so they had to fess up that he is no more.
Oh my goodness!
But amazingly, like 20 years ago, this happened, and they held a funeral without telling anybody. On Groundhog Day, instead of revealing his shadow, they put him in a casket. There were children wailing. It was fantastic. It's one of the great Canadian stories.
Well, Chris, what an incredibly festive way to start this.
I just want to stick with the theme.
And Lynn wants to know, where in Canada are you, Chris?
I'm in the delightful small town of Port Hope, Ontario, Canada, which if anyone has seen the movie It, or It 2, that was filmed in my town. That is my town. That clown hung around for 2 summers, and it was weird.
And then the groundhog in the casket, fun times, giving you a lot of time to write your fantastic new book. Now, if you can tell us just a little bit about how The Eye Test, the book itself, came to be.
I mean, it was a series of accidents, like a lot of things. I had written a lot at Esquire about creative, smart people. And not many of them use spreadsheets to come up with their genius. And then I'd also written about analytics because I used to be a baseball writer. So I was there at the start of Moneyball and everything like that. And just felt like there was a middle ground that wasn't really being explored between analytics and sort of smart creative thinking. And that the book, I thought, is hopefully a case for nuance, a case for both sides of the argument, multiple perspectives. It's not super sexy. I'm supposed to write a book that says everything you know is wrong. This book is more like, yeah, you're probably doing a pretty good job, but you could maybe do a little bit better.
Well, it's a really incredible read, and we'll get to some of the nitty gritty in a moment. But speaking of baseball, I think Moneyball is the Michael Lewis book, and the movie figures a little bit in. You have a very interesting take on it. So can you actually tell us the viewers a little bit about your personal connection with Billy Beane, the general manager of the Oakland A's back
It's nice that you're opening this with me having to tell a story that's very painful. Well, thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, you're well, the casket and the groundhog, and
no,
it's very Canadian.
We're gonna keep the darkness going. When I started at Esquire, my first story for Esquire was about a baseball pitcher named Barry Zito, who many of your viewers might remember from both the A's and the Giants. And so when I wrote about him, I learned quite a lot about Oakland's sort of analytical bent. This was 2001, 2002. And so one of my next stories I proposed when I was at Esquire was on Billy Beane and how he was looking at baseball in a different way. My editor said, great. I called up Billy. He was very polite. He said, I'd love to. There's a guy who has just started hanging out with me. I'd feel like a bit of a heel if I just bring you on in, but I tell you what, this is not going to amount to anything. Just wait a little bit and then you can come on out. And the guy who had just started hanging out with Billy Beane was a guy named Michael Lewis, and their little conversations amounted to something after all, which was Moneyball, which came out in 2003, sold millions of copies, became a very good movie, changed the world. Yeah. So that's my near. I wouldn't have written Moneyball. I would have written a story about Billy Beane, though, and I didn't get the chance. Michael Lewis did a very good job with it.
Well, to hell with him. You're
No,
with
it's
us.
fine. It's fine. It's
Yeah.
fine.
But
Fine.
so I think to a certain extent, pivoting from Moneyball to your book, The Eye Test, I think in that movie there is kind of like the heroes are the underdogs, the guy, his mucked up elbow and this and that. So I think to a certain extent that's analytics are so interesting, but are so great. But I think your book is really a pivot away from that to go, well, there are pitfalls there as well. And I think that you take on such a range of different topics, from politics to weather to The Price is Right, which I wanted to get to in a moment, to art. And I think, because we have Danny Rubin on in a moment, I think it's particularly fascinating that you're saying that how sometimes formulas do not always yield the best thing. Could you just relate the story of Relativity Media, Ryan Kavanaugh? And it's a juicy read too.
Yeah, well, that was one of the stories when I was at Esquire that sort of awakened me to the problems of analytics, the limits of analytics. And again, I am not anti-science. I'm not anti-math. I'm not anti-data. I'm not anti-smart people. I am pro all of those things, but there are limits. And what happened with Moneyball is people started to apply, the lessons of Moneyball in other fields, understandably. Well, if that worked in baseball, maybe it'll work here. But what happened was some good people failed, and also some bad people might have been slightly charlatany about it. And in the film industry, a guy named Ryan Kavanaugh claimed to have learned how to moneyball movie audiences. The great problem in Hollywood has always been nobody knows anything about when it comes to who is going to go see what. And Ryan claimed to have, using statistics, he had like a massive mainframe, and he would plug in, if this actor and this director did this kind of movie on a July weekend, historically it had done well, and classic data mining, and he lost billions of dollars and didn't make that many good movies in the process, made a lot of formulaic stuff, because his thinking was, well, people have seen that, they'll want to see that again. People do want comfort and, to kind of know what they're seeing in a lot of ways, but they don't want to see exactly the same thing over and over again. And that's I think the problem, where he ran into sort of the limits of analytics. You still need taste.
And that will come back to the hopeful message of your book, which is so interesting. I mean, can you define the term eye test to begin with?
Yeah, I'm trying to make a case for, and it's not instinct, it's not gut. My gut would be useless at a lot of things because I don't have any experience. But there are things that people are good at, and there are things that people have practiced and become trained at and become experts in. And I feel like with the analytics movement, a lot of those people are being dismissed, that their experience doesn't count. Everything is wrong. Going back to the picture, I saw it in baseball, where some really smart baseball people started to get dismissed. And it's happened in other fields too. And what I'm trying to make the case for is, if you are a smart, experienced, creative thinker, don't feel the pressure to try to conform to the analytics movement. That people can look at problems with that method, of course. And sometimes it will be the right method. But if you have a particular set of skills and experience that gives you a unique perspective on something, why would we want to lose that? Why wouldn't we also want that voice in the conversation? And so the eye test is sort of, it was used in Moneyball as sort of a bad thing, that scouts would judge baseball players based on their jawline, how they looked, which of course doesn't matter at all when it comes to hitting. But what your eyes tell you, what your experience tells you, does have value in other respects. And I'm trying to make the case for, I hope it's a hopeful book in the sense that I think there's still a place for people in a lot of these problems, the human element. And I feel like we've sort of drifted away from it, but now hopefully, I think a lot of people are sort of ready to kind of come back to a little more of a human approach to some of our problems.
Yeah, and no, it's a fascinating book. There's just story after story in sort of in the medical profession, in this interesting and tragic helicopter disaster, how it was decoded, what of a guy just thinking through how it's solved. I think also I'd love to just touch on, to give people a little feel for how fun it is to read this book. I found myself going back to The Price is Right section. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you just tell people about the Tenant Terry? And it is one of many stories that are so great in this book, so you must read it, but just essence it a little bit for us if you could.
So The Price is Right had been on TV for like 40 years, and people watched it a very particular way. And then along came at least one man, possibly two, who watched it slightly differently. And they realized, at least one of them, I like to think both of them did this, Terry and Ted, two guys who are at The Price is Right on the same day. They realized that prizes repeated. And so, those of us who are casual viewers of The Price is Right on snow days in our youth will remember rice-a-roni and turtle wax. Like, I remember those things repeating. But
mushroom soup,
cream
right?
of mushroom soup, Campbell's cream of mushroom, because Bob Barker was a strict vegetarian, and so no meat products.
And the green egg. So
Terry claims that the first thing he noticed, the big prize he noticed repeating, was a grill called the Big Green Egg, and the prices were the same when he saw it twice. And so he says that he just memorized all the prizes, 1,000 prizes. There was about 1,000. And there's another guy, Ted, who claims to have done the same thing. And they were both at The Price is Right on the same day. And Terry got on stage, and The Price is Right got absolutely rolled that day. And Terry was the first person to be perfect in the showcase, which is at the end, the $23,743, an extremely exact bid that he claims he came up with through hard work. Ted claims that Terry heard Ted yelling in the audience, because you can audience participation. And one of the fun things about the story, I hope, in the book, is like deciding who's telling the truth.
Yeah, his wife's birthday or their anniversary.
Yeah.
And that
they could both be telling the truth. They could be both telling the truth.
Never happened in the history of the show. And I think that's fascinating. And he's like playing blackjack in Las Vegas.
He's a meteorologist, so he's good at pattern recognition, and he worked in casino surveillance, which is all about pattern recognition. It was just, for me, he's just an example of the kind of person I'm talking about, where someone is just looking at the world as an opportunity and using a unique set of skills and experience to maybe come up with a different solution to a problem.
And I think finally, I think that, and not to give everything away, but it's chock full of great stories. You talk about magic and Teller's incredible trick about the shadow and the rose.
Yes.
And I immediately went online to look at, and it is online, a version of that. And just can you tell us what that trick, if you will, means?
Teller is probably my favorite person I've ever interviewed, I would say. He's just, when I met him, Teller, this is Penn and Teller. So Penn is sort of the large, loud one, and Teller is actually a very normal size. He just seems small next to Penn, and silent. And so before we spoke, I wasn't sure what Teller would be like as someone to talk to, because you never hear his voice. As it turns out, Teller speaks beautifully. He speaks in paragraphs. He's well read. He's a former Latin teacher who wrote his own textbook. Like, he's a very smart, creative person. And we talked about making great tricks. And if you go see Penn and Teller, they do magic that will make your heart hurt. Like, they do stuff where it's just, you can hear people crying in the audience. And what they do is they make you want to believe that it's actually magic. The magic is so good that it makes you want to believe that they're actually like true magicians. Of course they're not. And Teller gave me my favorite quote that I think I've ever received. And this comes down to this trick shadows. It comes down to another trick, the red ball, and all these. He tells people, Penn comes out before this trick called the red ball and says, Teller does this trick with a single piece of thread. And then he does the trick. And magicians told me there's no way he does that with a single piece of thread. They're lying. Teller does do it with a single piece of thread. And what he told me was that sometimes magic is just someone spending more time on something than anyone else might reasonably expect. And that is everything I believe in.
Man, okay.
That's the book.
And on that note, Chris, people should buy it anyway because it's a fantastic read. So thank you so much from Cheerful Canada with its own version of Groundhog. Chris Jones, amazing Chris Jones, his new book is The Eye Test, A Case for Human Creativity in the Age of Analytics. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Sandra.
Big pleasure. Okay. And pivoting, if we will, from Chris to Danny Rubin, who is next. First, the 30-second download on Danny Rubin, and there you see. Okay. So in Danny Rubin's screen credits include Hear No Evil, SFW, and Groundhog Day, for which he deservedly won a raft of screenwriting awards here and internationally. Rubin has taught screenwriting throughout the US and abroad and served as the first Briggs Copeland lecturer on screenwriting at a certain middle school called Harvard University. Groundhog Day, the musical, opened to rave reviews at the Old Vic Theatre in London in August 2016, earning Rubin and composer-lyricist Tim Minchin the Olivier Award for Best New Musical. It opened on Broadway in April 2017, garnering 7 Tony nominations, Best Musical, Best Book in a Musical, and FYI, he's actually written a fun book called How to Write Groundhog Day. You can see it there, and there's a link in the chat to order it. Welcome, Danny Rubin.
Hey, I see.
Hey, all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Are there groundhogs there?
Not in our yard, just the normal skunks and raccoons.
Okay, so nothing in a little coffin. Okay, good to know. Okay, well, so I'm going to ask you because I actually met you in New Mexico at a writers thing many years ago, and you're so gracious to come on. It's like you're asked about Groundhog Day every year, and here we are asking it again. And it's such an extraordinary movie that is completely the opposite of the relative media formula thing. You could not invent a formula that it's this movie. So you will indulge us, and I will ask you some questions about it. And if you have questions in the chat, put them in there. So, okay, can you tell us how Groundhog Day came to be?
Because I was deciding that I wanted to be a screenwriter of movies, and I needed to come up with some ideas. So I sat down and brainstormed a whole bunch of them one weekend. And that was one of the 10 top ones that I figured I could write any of these. And that was one of them. Actually, it was sort of half an idea. It was the part about somebody reliving the same day. And I thought if he can remember everything and nobody else can, then he can manipulate people and get things that he wants. And that seemed like a great storytelling device and a lot of fun you can have with the audience by giving them an expectation and then he does something different. So, which is like an improv game that I had known from back in the day. But then I wrote something else, one of my other 10 ideas, and then I wrote another one of my 10 ideas. And then it was a couple of years later, and I was needing another new movie idea. And I was thinking just about if a person could live long enough, maybe they would change. Like some people don't have enough time. So I thought, well, what if it was just somebody living forever? And I thought they would go through different stages of life. And now I want to be in the country. Now I want to be in the city. Now I want to be with people, whatever. I thought eternity was kind of a lot to bite off for a movie, set design and character development, everything. And then I remembered the other idea about one guy repeating the same day over, and I realized I could get eternity just all in one day. So I got that part. And now the movie wasn't just about a device for telling a story. It was about a man's life. And I thought of it like Siddhartha, like a young man's journey through life. And so then I had a movie and I wrote it, and then I gave it to Harold Ramis, who made it something the studio would want to make, and that's how it all came out.
Well, and with the studio, and I know that you've been asked this before, so were there surprises along the way of what happened to the movie and how it eventually turned out, of things that you didn't dream of at the beginning that occurred when it was made?
Well, it wasn't a surprise to me that the studio would try very hard to make a movie they were more comfortable with. So there were some things like when I was coming up with the idea, I was saying, okay, he's repeating a day. How? What is the story? What's the device? Is it a magical clock? Is it a scientist? Is it a time machine? Is it a wormhole in space? And it all felt so stupidly arbitrary. And I didn't want the story to be about the device and how he got into it and how he got out of it. It seemed to me it was already an interesting story, just all the cool things that he can do repeating the day. And so I thought, how could I get rid of that? And I thought, oh, well, let's start after we're already in the repetition and he never has to explain it. And that way we hit the ground running with all the fun stuff going on. And I knew that that was not the way Hollywood made romantic comedies. And there would be some pressure to come up with what I came to call the gypsy curse scene. And I was told that they were going to put in a gypsy curse scene, and Harold said, don't worry, we'll shoot it and then we'll throw it away. And I thought that was dangerous. Dangerous way to innovate. He promised me that it would always start after the repetition began, but he started thinking, no, we really have to start it sooner in order to give the story the familiar arc of this is Phil, he's a horrible person. What could be the worst thing that would happen to Phil? To have the worst day ever and then have to repeat it. So it was kind of set up in that kind of way, which is more familiar. But the rest of the stuff was so, I guess, innovative that it didn't matter to, I mean, the delight of the surprise for me in seeing the final movie wasn't just seeing the movie, but realizing, okay, people are getting it anyway. It's just fine. He didn't ruin it. If anything, he made it better, and hats off. Thank you.
I just want to share some in the chat. Samantha, it's one of her favorite movies of all time. Teresa Schreiner says, love the movie and was amazed. The repetition was fun, interesting, engaging, and is one of my favorites. And I think because the rules that you've set up are hilarious, of toasting to world peace and learning French. He learns everything. And John Halligan says, Dennis Prager said it was a great story of redemption. Meredith loves hearing your thought process, etc. And I think Bill Murray certainly is a character, like, it really encompasses that. It's really hard to imagine anybody else in that role.
Well, one of the fun things about working on the musical is we knew we couldn't cast Bill Murray.
Right.
So for all of the people who saw it as a Bill Murray movie, I had always seen it as a story that existed before Bill Murray, so I could picture it with a different character and hopefully disabuse anybody else of how they had to be connected. And we went through several workshops before we actually cast it, and there were different Phils and they were all wonderful, and they had slightly different personalities, and the story worked regardless. So it was important to create a Phil Connors for the musical as a character who is different from a Bill Murray kind of character, just to differentiate right away. You're in the play, you're not in the movie.
And so what was that like working on this very, very successful musical? Was it fun for you?
It was the best. It was the best. It was so much fun. What happened with the movie, which was also a great experience, being with these wonderful people so young in my career, early in my career, it was still sort of, okay, Danny, we'll take it from here. And why wouldn't they do that? Harold is a writer and he's used to improvising with Bill, and they'll do the scene as written a couple of times and then they'll start improvising and surprising each other. And that's how you come up with, those magical moments on film. For the musical, I was at the table. It was me and Tim Minchin, the composer, and Matthew Warchus, the director, and the three of us in a room and pacing and throwing out ideas and yes-anding each other until we came up with something we all loved. And it was amazing fun. And it was also fun to revisit the story, 25 years later for me. Well, how can we make the characters deeper or make the themes richer? And when people are singing, they're singing something. So we have to understand the emotion behind it, and got much deeper into everything for everybody. So it was great. And to have a bunch of Broadway actors, and I'm sitting at a table, I scratch something on a piece of paper, like this will be a funnier line, and I hand it to the director, and he laughs, and he hands it to his assistant director, who runs it up to the actors, and they memorize it real fast, and then they do it again. It felt wonderful. It was just great fun.
Yeah, in a way that brings you back to your improv roots, I gather, where you wrote and performed in improv for many years before you wrote children's television and film and stuff like that. So that sounds fun. There's another question for you in the chat from Paul Roberts. How did Harold Ramis get connected to the project? Had you known him prior to the project?
No, not at all. The script had, basically, I had just sold a movie to the one that became Hear No Evil to Hollywood. Was my first thing that I actually tried to sell, and it sold, and moved from Chicago to LA, and I had an agent, and he said, you got to write something new fairly quickly. And I had this Groundhog idea that I thought was a good calling card, and I wrote it very quickly, and I got it out there, and I met 50 different producers because of the script, and every single one of them started their conversation, I loved Groundhog Day, of course we can't make it. And I said, well, of course. And then they I didn't know Hollywood, but I thought it was better to agree with people. And then I wound up getting other work instead, which was fine. So it had been bouncing around for a year. Then my agent left the business to become a school teacher, and I have, as you know, a long history of choosing agents who decide to leave the business. And you divorced, beheaded, died. It was like that. And I was looking for an agent, and one of them that I sent it to was an agent at CAA who represented, among other people, Harold Ramis, and said, I think this might be what he's looking for. And sent it to Harold, and Harold liked it, and he and I talked, and then they set it up.
And I mean, I know we were joking that you have a guitar behind you. You're in New Mexico now, and you've really, your creative life is so interesting. You know, it's kind of like sort of began theater, then there's movies, you're back in making musical. I know that you write music as well. I mean, do you think your life as an artist, I guess the question would be any advice or wisdom to any of the viewers. We have actually quite a few aspiring writers and creative people in the audience in terms of what keeps it fresh for you, and what and let's see, there are the many agents of King Danny. They're really funny in the chat. Nice 6 reference. Danny, do you wake up at 6 every morning? At 6 every morning? At 6 every morning? Yeah. So okay. So I think Colin. So what is your creative day like? Do you wake up at 6 to Sonny and Cher? I got you, babe. What's it like? What's your day like?
I go into different phases depending on the way my life is now is a little different than it was a couple of months ago, because a couple of months ago I was working on a stage play and I was finishing it and I was deep into it. So I'd get up, I'd go to the gym, have a cup of coffee, come into my office, which is the garage, the detached building where it never had cars in it. Apparently it's where they used to keep the cow. But, I put in a bookshelf and a place to hang my guitar, so it's better now. Moo. I don't know. Each day sort of follows its own rhythms, and I often complain that I don't have a schedule, and I wish I had one because it would make things easier. And every now and then I impose one on myself. I'm practicing guitar scales or vocal scales, or I'm going to sit down and write a song. And it's never what I've set aside time to do. It's always go with what you feel like doing. So that's been the pattern, the rhythm that I follow. And I don't teach right now, and one of the reasons is because I don't quite know what to tell the students. I know how to encourage their creativity, and I never taught them this is how to write a screenplay. I always sort of gave them little tips and tricks and tools for their box and things to pay attention to, but ultimately my job was to encourage them to write whatever they wanted to, whatever they were excited by, whatever gets you writing. And then if you're at least a little bit introspective, you learn from what you've written, and that's how you become a writer. Much more, for me, much more than reading a book on how to do it. Which is why I have that tongue-in-cheek thing about writing Groundhog Day. It's like, I don't know how to write other movies. I just know how to write that one.
Yeah.
So when I first moved to New Mexico, I was feeling that I wasn't part of a group. I didn't know what group as an adult I belonged to. I wasn't sure. And I didn't feel like a screenwriter, even though I'd sold a couple of screenplays and my career seemed to be going in the right direction. But I met some people here in town who I felt at home with, and it was a group of artists. They painted. They were, today I'm going to write an opera. Today I'm going to write a limerick. Today I'm going to paint in this style, and today I'm going to paint in that style. And today I'm going to take the day off and drink some tequila with my friends and tell each other poetry. And I thought, these are my people. It's being an artist. It didn't mean that I was a good artist or anything not nearly as skillful as some of these people, but it felt like an integration of your own life values with your creative life. And it's not ruled by the business. And I'd say my rich, deep career in Hollywood proves that point. I always got out of it what I wanted, and sometimes they got what they wanted out of it, but never as often as they felt they should have. And I kind of limped along like that, and that's what I'm still limping, and it's fine.
Well, you're hardly limping from our point of view, but it's wonderful to hear you talk about the artistry and creative process for those who are listening. Ann Ryder, who just got some advice, and Rose Reeder, who is chiming on also. Although we have to move to, the time has flown by too quickly. So it was great chatting with you, Danny the Great. And then you can go if you have time to go in the chat, there are a couple of questions in the chat about if you can get on that for our listeners. So anyway, thank you so much, Danny Rubin in New Mexico, creator of the amazing movie Groundhog Day. And then there's a book, How to Write Groundhog Day. And your teaching is always wonderful as well. So thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, and last but not least, Heather Havrilesky, the 30-second download. She, Heather Havrilesky, is the author of the popular advice column Ask Polly for New York Magazine's The Cut, now a wildly popular feature on Substack. She's the author, so find it, Ask Polly, Substack. She's the author of the memoir Disaster Preparedness and the advice book How to Be a Person in the World. Aside from being a columnist for New York Magazine, she's written for The New Yorker, The Atlantic, New York Times Magazine, and NPR's All Things Considered, among others. She was Salon's TV critic for 7 years. Speaking of Groundhog Day and a relationship, Heather's new memoir, just out, is titled Foreverland, on the divine tedium of marriage. Thank you so much. Welcome, Heather.
Hello.
Hello.
Here I am.
You are beaming to us from, is it North Carolina?
Yeah, Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yes.
I moved here last August.
Yes, and you also have a guitar behind you.
I do. We're all rockers tonight.
Yes.
What is that?
Expressing creativity. So, of course, your book, it's like Foreverland on the divine tedium of marriage. It's so timely at this particular time, moving in year 2 in the pandemic, where so many couples I know are going through so many facets of what you describe in your book, but I've never seen it as hilariously and precisely described as you do. It's almost like single people have done better than some of the couples. But to you, what brought you to write this particular book yourself? So
I was reading for a while. I was reading books about marriage. I had to review a handful of books about marriage, and that kind of started it. And with every book about a marriage that was still alive, I kept thinking, what is this marriage really like? It's like I kept feeling like I am not getting the whole picture here. there are things hidden from view, and I want to know the real story. I don't want to feel like I'm decoding some mystery, or that I'm being fed some kind of like press release, sugar-coated version of a marriage, which is something that we do with each other in conversations as well. We sort of are a little bit afraid of letting each other know too many dark things about our marriage, because we don't want people to think we're in bad marriages. So I sort of saw an opportunity to write. And at the time, I very arrogantly thought, me with my amazing marriage, I can write a wonderful book about how hard even an amazing marriage like mine can be at its low points. And then I foolishly sold a book about my marriage, and then I had to write a book about my marriage, which was immediately became it immediately revealed itself as a much more challenging project than I had thought it would be. And then COVID set in the middle of writing it. And then I was trapped with my husband. And in fact, right after I sold the book, I went out to dinner and someone hit on me, and I laughed it off and told my husband about it. And then I became a little bit obsessed with this person who hit on me. And that was interesting. And I had to tell my husband about that. So I'm trapped at home, slightly plagued by an obsession. I mean, in some ways it was partially because we were trapped at home that I became slightly obsessed. And then I got, well, like some other things happened. We won't give away the whole story, but many things happened over the course of trying to write this book. And in fact, the book became darker and darker as these things happened. And yet it was all funny too. I mean, even the darkness was funny, and I think it makes for a pretty good adventure. But I don't recommend selling a book about your marriage if you don't want to challenge your marriage, because it was a challenge to my marriage writing this book.
Well, Candace Iacono in the chat says, Heather, you're such a gem. Thanks for shepherding so much of us through our weird anxieties and dramas over the years. And I think that is what's so astonishing about your book. And it's here, and you can see I've like dog-eared at like so many pages, because you really say what we really think and how we really are. And you're right, it is also very funny, and you're very honest about it. And I think that and as a female writer, you're fantastic, because you're fearless and you're honest and you're really funny. And I think that you've talked about, the experience of, you wrote this essay an excerpt was in the New York Times, and I read it and I laughed so hard. You were talking about the noises that your husband makes, and that his sneeze, I read it to my family, that it's so loud, it's like an air horn put in your face, and that he's never sneezed, and in 15 years, and you haven't said, Jesus Christ, and I go, oh my God, and I have read, I posted on Facebook, and people are talking about the footwear that their partners, and for women, they have their complaints about us too. So, and I think that you had written, and I think it was a good housekeeping piece about, then sometimes the men read that and then going, oh, I'm so angry, and how can you do this? And what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, the book was excerpted there was an excerpt in the New York Times, and they chose this chapter about anger. I knew that I wanted to have a chapter that just explored those times when you feel like you can't believe you're with this person. You can't believe you're seeing what you're seeing and hearing what you're hearing. And you start to have escape fantasies, and start to feel like, why did I do this to myself? At the time when I wrote that chapter, I had just gotten back from this Australian vacation with my kids and my husband, and we were trapped for a while on this eco resort island covered in birds, and the birds were squawking, and the kids were very unhappy because there was no air conditioning, and there were birds squawking everywhere, and there was bird poop all over the island. And my husband kind of reverted and became like a child in this situation. And so I started to write about anger. I wrote and at the time when I was writing that chapter, also my husband had a cold and he was very phlegmy and making terrible sounds. And I was laughing and writing this, it was almost like I was challenging myself to write the meanest possible thing that I could, the most honest and the low point, the most negative point in your thinking about your spouse. And so I showed it to Bill immediately after I wrote it, because I loved it so much, and he laughed immediately. I mean, one of the challenges of this book was not that he had trouble with anything I was writing. He actually loved everything, insisted on me keeping a lot of things that I wasn't sure about. And so it was kind of I wrote this in a spirit of, haha, we've all been there, right? And I think that out of context of in the book, you sort of know who we are as a couple by the time you get to that chapter. So it doesn't seem that disastrous.
Right.
But I think out of context, some people just felt like, they read it as, who is this awful woman and why doesn't she get divorced immediately? I do think that there's, as a culture, we're allergic to women's anger. We're allergic to women in general. And, we don't want to hear the women expressing the full range of their emotions, and we don't want them displaying the full range of their capacity as humans, which includes being dismissive and sometimes superior and sometimes condescending, because sometimes we do know best. But certainly this book is it's not remotely a book about how I know best. Not at all.
No, and you always say, and I think there's a line in that. And like, did I mention that I am the villain here? Because you out yourself to a hilarious, and there's about yelling and it's so funny. You yourself cast yourself as, and here's what I did. And it's almost, I sense a deliciousness of the writer when you get there, because you're about to describe the worst possible thing. And so that is what makes your writing amazing and human and hilarious. And I think Chris Carmen in the chat asks, did you go into the book with the theme of Foreverland? How did you come up with that title?
I had the subtitle first. I know I wanted to talk about how the things that you fear the most about marriage sort of become sublime in some ways. There's a certain, it's on the divine tedium of marriage. So I wanted it to be a little confusing. I wanted to kind of open up the door to the things that you fear the most about marriage are sometimes the nicest things. And someone, in one interview, someone said, oh, this book is about how marriage is a trap. I might even have written marriage as a trap at some point in the book, but I wouldn't say that my view of marriage is this dim thing. It's almost just like the bewilderment of encountering, just the bewilderment and the discoveries that occur over the course of a lifetime with someone, or 15 years in my case of someone. There are so many learning teachable moments and so many falls from grace, and there are so many times when you're failing yourself. I mean, most of the fights I've had with Bill have really at their essence been about feeling disappointed in myself and not wanting to let him down. And there's a way that when you're disappointed in yourself, it can easily become punitive because you're so ashamed that you blast that out onto someone else instead of just being vulnerable and admitting, I feel like I'm failing you, and I feel like I'm not good enough for this marriage in a way. Like, you expect love to turn you into a better version of yourself. And love does sometimes turn you into a better version, but sometimes it turns you into a worse version of yourself. So the question, remind me of the question. I may have wandered far and long away from the question.
It was fascinating. I was thinking of something like,
Foreverland.
Right,
the
forever
title.
land, right.
Yeah. And then for a while the title was Happy Ending, because I got a little bit stuck on the idea of the fact that a marriage is successful only once someone dies, and it's considered a failure until one of you dies. So once someone dies, you won. That's victory. That really got stuck in my head. And also I loved the idea of having kind of a dirty title, Happy Ending, just a debased, sort of depraved sounding title. But then Foreverland, I like because it sort of hints at to entrapment. It hints at that you're trapped, but it's also it's also sort of conjures the fantasy of forever, because there is no forever. We're all going to die. Nothing lasts forever. And also the idea that you're supposed to stay with someone forever and you're a failure if you don't, I wanted to call into question. And then also just to toy with the idea of it's a faraway, wondrous place where everyone is at their best. And, it's like this stagnant thing where we're all magical now, and our love is unconditional and nothing will ever change. And now we're just happily ever after. I loved the idea of sort of the gloss of that, and then sort of carving that out and saying, no, actually, sometimes you have cold feet, especially if you're with the right person, you have cold feet because you're never going to get out of it. I mean, that was part of my realization in writing the book was, I know I'm with the right person and that we were meant to be together. I've always felt that way, but that only pounds home the fact that I will never leave the perimeter. I will never leave these sights and sounds. I will be hearing them until one of us dies. And that's something to celebrate and enjoy. And it's also something to occasionally complain angrily about in the New York Times.
There is a quick final question, but I also want to say, I have to say, there is a scene of a family car ride with a child who has to go to the bathroom that is the funniest thing that I've ever read, and so true. So for that alone, Kathleen Brady says, just quick final question. Do you have a daily writing routine?
Yeah, I get up when I wake up, and because I'm 51, I wake up at often 5 a.m. Hooray. But, I write in the morning. So I get up and I come downstairs and I turn on my treadmill desk and I walk on my treadmill desk and I write for about 2 to 3 hours every day. Some days I skid to a halt and realize that my brain is not functioning in the proper way to write good things. But yeah, that's how I start my day. And I find the treadmill desk keeps me focused. If I'm in a chair, I fall asleep. So I write for 3 hours, and then the rest of the day is sort of like, I can consider myself a success if I've written some words. That's about the extent of my schedule.
And they're fantastic words. Thank you so much. It's been such a huge pleasure. The book is amazing and everyone should get it. It's Foreverland on the Divine Tedium of Marriage. I'm holding
Thank you, Sandra.
here.
Thank you so much.
It's fantastic. Thank you for joining. And John Halligan notes Foreverland and Groundhog Day could swap titles. Interesting.
Oh, what a tight theme today.
It's so tight. We're so tight. Thank you so much. And back to you, Samantha.
Oh man, that was fantastic, wasn't it? Don't you feel like you're inspired? I do.
Really inspired.
Oh man. Anyway, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sandra, as always. And I have to say, thanks to our production manager, the Oz Behind the Curtain, Julie Corlett. Don't forget, copies of today's books by our featured authors are available at Once Upon a Time.
And also Eric Peterson was in the chat, wasn't he?
Yes.
Today? I think.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
And Wendy, thanks for your comment on my lipstick. Hi,
lipstick.
Eric. Okay.
Eric's going to. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for long for great content about authors. Here to tell us what we've got coming up in the newspapers is Eric Peterson. Eric, are you going to say anything? Or are you behind the scenes? Hey.
Here I am.
Hi.
I only came because Sandra made me.
Wait, I thought I made you. Never mind. Go
All
ahead.
right, anyway. Yeah, we've got some great stuff coming up this weekend. We've got a wonderful book by Stephen White. It's 110 years, but it's 100 years of California photography from his own collection, and they're amazing images. And so that is definitely, it's a wonderful story. You don't want to miss that. There's also a terrific piece on the new book about Agatha Christie's disappearance. It's a fictional account of what happened. We've got some other good stuff. Also, please sign up for the newsletter we've got. It's a great place to get all of our coverage put together, including this show. You get it all together, all in one place. It's very easy. It's sent to your inbox, and it's free. And why not? All right.
It's
Thanks,
awesome.
everybody.
And thanks, Eric. It's the first thing I open when it comes in my inbox. Really, truly, I love it. It's great. Okay, thanks again. And thank you all for supporting this program. If you've got thoughts to share from today, or you have suggestions for us or just notes, please shoot us a message at events@scng.com. Come back next month. We have another great lineup, and just keep coming back. Take care, everybody.